Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, January 15, 2024. Israel and Hamas reach a ceasefire and hostage release agreement. Both President Joe Biden and President-elect Donald Trump claim credit for making it happen. Coming up, we'll hear from President Biden and Senator Marco Rubio, Secretary of State nominee for President-elect Trump, at his Senate confirmation hearing. Senator Rubio also tells the Senate committee that the U.S.'s unbalanced relationship with China is the biggest threat to American prosperity. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, nominated for U.S. Attorney General in the upcoming Trump administration, says at her Senate confirmation hearing that she would get back to the basics: gangs, drugs, terrorists, cartels, our border, and our foreign adversaries. Democratic senators ask Pam Bondi about resisting any Donald Trump White House demands and her past advocacy for overturning Donald Trump's loss in the 2020 presidential election. Vice President Kamala Harris talks about the Los Angeles wildfires and misinformation about FEMA aid. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer says she wants to work with President-elect Trump on economic policy and that compromise is not a bad word. And the Supreme Court hears a case challenging a Texas law requiring age verification to access pornographic websites. Associated Press reports that Israel and Hamas agreed to pause the devastating war in the Gaza Strip. Mediators announced Wednesday, raising the possibility of winding down the deadliest and most destructive fighting between the bitter enemies. The three-phase ceasefire deal promises the release of dozens of hostages held by militants in Gaza and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in Israel, and will allow hundreds of thousands of people displaced in Gaza to return to what remains of their homes. It will also flood desperately needed humanitarian aid into a territory ravaged by 15 months of war. That was the article from Associated Press. President Joe Biden made a statement about the agreement at the White House.
Good afternoon. It's a very good afternoon, because at long last, I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. For more than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th, more than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people, more than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families. The elements of this deal were what I laid out in detail this past May, which was embraced by countries around the world and endorsed overwhelmingly by the UN Security Council. The deal is structured in three phases. Phase 1 will last 6 weeks. It includes a full and complete ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli forces from all the populated areas of Gaza, and the release of a number of hostages held by Hamas, including women and elderly and the wounded. And I'm proud to say Americans will be part of that hostage release in Phase 1 as well. And the Vice President and I cannot wait to welcome them home. In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And during Phase 1, the Palestinians can also return to their neighborhoods in all the areas of Gaza. And the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will begin. And the innocent people can have a greater access to these vital supplies. You know, during the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get Phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait and the President of Egypt, and we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. Then, when Phase 2 begins, there will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire will become permanent. And finally, Phase 3, any final remains of hostages who have been killed will be returned to their families. and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement and the whole ending the war.
President Biden at the White House, flanked by Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. President-elect Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social account, this epic ceasefire agreement could only have happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. I am thrilled American and Israeli hostages will be returning home to be reunited with their families and loved ones. With this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build upon the momentum of the ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords. This is only the beginning of great things to come for America and indeed the world. Part of the statement from President-elect Donald Trump. And the Qatari Prime Minister held a news conference in Doha announcing the ceasefire, thanking both Brett McGurk, President Biden's Mideast envoy, and Steve Witkoff, President-elect Trump's Mideast envoy. At the end of President Biden's statement, he took a couple of questions. He was asked about working with the incoming Trump administration during these negotiations.
How do you see the future of Gaza now? As you were saying, the implementation of this deal will be in the hands of the next administration, and basically they will shape the future of Gaza. So how do you see this future? And also, how much credit do you give to the Trump team for this deal? Trump is already taking credit for it.
Well, you know, this is the exact framework of the deal I proposed back in May. Exact. And we got the world to endorse it. Secondly, it's America's support for Israel that helped them badly weaken Hamas and its backers and create the conditions for this deal. And thirdly, I knew this deal would have to be implemented by the next team, so I told my team to coordinate closely with the incoming team to make sure we're all speaking with the same voice, because that's what American presidents do.
How many Americans will be in the? How many Americans will be released when the hostages are being released?
All the exact detail of how many people are being held, how many bodies will be returned, unless will all be forthcoming. All of it. All of it. Thank you.
Mr. President, what's your level of confidence that this deal will hold?
I'm confident.
Who does the history books credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
President Biden at the White House. The ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas was announced as President-elect Donald Trump's choice for Secretary of State. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, was testifying at his confirmation hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Here are the questions from Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland.
We all witnessed the horrific October 7th Hamas terror attacks on Israel. We've also witnessed the devastation and human rights catastrophe in Gaza. Like you, I've met Israeli families who lost loved ones on October 7th. I've met with hostage families. I've also met with Palestinian families who lost kids and other innocents in this war. So I was very pleased to see the announcement today of the ceasefire and the return of hostages. Let us pray that it holds and that it is implemented. But of course, as we discussed yesterday, the question is what happens next. And we all agree that Hamas can have no role in the governance of Gaza or any other place. We also know that for all its flaws and faults, the Palestinian Authority has recognized Israel's right to exist for the last 30 years since the Oslo Accords. Their security forces are trained by U.S. Forces. They today are fighting Palestinian militants in certain parts of the West Bank. But at the same time, their funds have been restricted by the Netanyahu government today. These are the funds that belong to the PA. We've seen a record increase in the number of settlements in the West Bank. And so the PA is not able to deliver on what had been the hope of Oslo, which is self-determination, security, and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. So you have said that the ideal way forward, recognizing that we've been at this for a long time, is a two-state solution. There are members of the Netanyahu government that today want to annex all of the West Bank. So my question is, do you agree that annexation would be contrary to peace and security in the Middle East? And what is your vision going forward?
First, let me say that, yeah, the ideal would be that there not be conflict and the people could live side by side with one another without being in conflict and with the ability to pursue prosperity. Sadly and unfortunately, the conditions for that to exist have not been in place for some substantial period of time. I point to you as an example, back in 2020, the Trump administration offered $58 billion, or about $50 billion or $58 billion, $58 to $50 billion in investment to the Palestinians, and that included, I believe, 28 or 29 billion specifically for Gaza, and it was rejected. That offer was made back in January of 2020, and then it pivoted over as a result of that rejection to what we now know as the Abraham Accords. Second, I would say that Israel is a small nation who at its narrowest point is 9 miles wide. It has been historically surrounded by enemies that seek their destruction. Hezbollah to the north, Hamas to the west, Iran further north with nuclear weapons, constantly. In fact, I would argue that if Israel had not been firm and strong in its response in this endeavor, most recently, they may very well have faced an existential threat, as they continue to in many ways. Now, here's the good news, and it's not just about the ceasefire today, although that's very important. The good news is that potentially we have had a dynamic shift in the region that has an historic opportunity, if appropriately structured and pursued, that changes the dynamics of what might be possible. And that, we've discussed Syria, we've discussed the events in Lebanon quite a bit as well, the degrading of the Iranian capability, which I hope will continue, and hopefully the ability to reach some agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia on normalization and being able to engage both for their mutual security and also economic prosperity. The real open question for the Palestinians is, who will govern? Who will govern in Gaza in the short term, and who will ultimately govern? Will it be the Palestinian Authority or some other entity? Because it has to be someone. I think that was the initial goal for Gaza when the Israelis withdrew from there, and they turned it over. And they turned it over with greenhouses, and they turned it over with all kinds of economic development. Hamas won an election, they took over, and they destroyed the place and built tunnels for terrorists to operate from. So the key is not simply governance, it's who will govern. You can't turn it over to people who seek your destruction. And so I do think this is a very complex issue, and I think that's understating it. We all recognize it. But I also believe that we should not underestimate the potential opportunities that now exist. And it'll take some time to fully understand what those are, that perhaps open the door to things that were not open in the future. But from the Israeli perspective, which I fully understand, it begins with their existence. Because you cannot coexist with armed elements at your border who seek your destruction and evisceration as a state. You just can't. No nation on it. We wouldn't tolerate it, and they can't either. And it begins with having that level of security, and if they do, then I think there are opportunities that will come about as a result of it. Those opportunities historically have not existed in recent times. Perhaps we're living in an era where that will be the likelihood of it is higher because of recent events, unexpected events in Syria and Lebanon and other places.
Marco Rubio, nominee for Secretary of State, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, questioned by Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland. A Reuters article about today's confirmation hearing with another issue headline reads that Senator Marco Rubio, President-elect Donald Trump's nominee to be Secretary of State, warned on Wednesday that the United States must change course to avoid becoming more reliant on China and do more to discourage Beijing from invading Taiwan, as he promised a robust foreign policy focused on American interests. Article continues, the Republican senator, who is expected to comfortably win confirmation as the nation's top diplomat, did not detail how he would go about deterring China, but his remarks represent a stark message about changes in U.S. policy. Again, that was from Reuters. Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican of Nebraska, asked Senator Rubio about U.S. policy towards China.
Do you agree that the PRC is the biggest threat that we face as the United States?
The Communist Party of China leads the PRC, is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor now, in every realm. It's an extraordinary challenge. It's one that I believe will define the 21st century. When they write the book, about the 21st century. There's going to be some chapters in there about Putin. There's going to be some chapters in there about some of these other places. But the bulk of that book about the 21st century will be not just about China, but about the relationship between China and the United States and what direction it went. And I think you're alluding to it in your statement. I know you may have another question. I don't want to eat up all your time, but I do want to say this. The Chinese believe that the United States are a great power in inevitable decline and that they are an inevitable rise. Now, they already are. They're going to be a rich and powerful country, and we're going to have to deal with them. The danger is that because of our own actions, in many cases, a dangerous imbalance is built up in that relationship. We allowed them for years to pretend that they were some developing countries, so we should allow them to continue to cheat on trade and commerce. We should allow them to continue to expand. They lied about not militarizing and populating island chains in the South China Sea and the like. We allowed them for years before we got serious about it to conduct grotesque human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims, as an example. One of the most horrifying things happening on the planet. And for years, no one talked about it, which, by the way, not just has a human rights component to it, it allows them to use slave labor to produce goods that, at the expense of the rest of the world. Talk about not just a horrific humanitarian crisis, but an unfair trade practice as well. We've allowed them to get away with things. And frankly, the Chinese did what any country in the world would do given these opportunities. They took advantage of it. And so I think now we're dealing with the ramifications of it. I agree 100% what you said, but I remind you, and I remind everyone, I guess I want to make this point, that much of what we need to do to confront China is here at home. It's not just abroad, it's also here at home. We have to rebuild our domestic industrial capacity, and we have to make sure that the United States is not reliant on any single other nation for any of our critical supply chains.
And with 4 seconds left, how are you going to explain that to your average American, that we need this all-size society approach, and to your point exactly, that it needs to begin here at home, and so that people from my state, Nebraska, will understand and get on board?
If we stay on the road we're on right now, in less than 10 years, virtually everything that matters to us in life will depend on whether China will allow us to have it or not. Everything from the blood pressure medicine we take to what movies we get to watch, and everything in between, we will depend on China for it. They have come to dominate the critical mineral industry supplies throughout the world. Everywhere in the world, they've now established critical mineral rights. Even those who want to see more electric cars, no matter where you make them, those batteries are almost entirely dependent on the ability of the Chinese and the willingness of the Chinese Communist Party to produce it and export it to you. So if we don't change course, we are going to live in a world where much of what matters to us on a daily basis, from our security to our health, will be dependent on whether the Chinese allow us to have it or not. That's an unacceptable outcome.
Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, nominated by President-elect Donald Trump to be Secretary of State, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Questions coming from Senator Pete Ricketts, Republican from Nebraska. Senator Rubio spent about 4.5 to 5 hours before the committee. We covered it on the C-SPAN networks. Find the full video at cspan.org. U.S. House today passed a bill that would get rid of double taxation on companies operating in the U.S. and Taiwan. The vote was 423 to 1. The one no was Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky. Congressman Rudy Yakam, Republican of Indiana, posting on X, Taiwan is a key partner in de-risking our supply chains away from China. Taiwanese investment already supports 21,000 American jobs and $1.5 billion in American exports. Reducing double taxation will strengthen our relationship, increase bilateral investment, and create jobs. This bill now heads to the Senate. Washington Post with a summary of the Donald Trump nominees having hearings today. They write the Senate is accelerating the confirmation process Wednesday for President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks, with a half-dozen hearings scheduled. Among those appearing, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi for U.S. Attorney General and Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. Senate Democrats are pressing Bondi on whether she can maintain independence from Donald Trump. Rubio offered a robust defense of the utility of the NATO defense alliance, despite Trump's past sharp criticism of the group. Other committees are weighing the selections of John Ratcliffe for CIA Director, Chris Wright for Energy Secretary, Sean P. Duffy for Transportation Secretary, and Russell Vogt for Director of the Office of Management and Budget. That was the summary from the Washington Post. At the Pam Bondi hearing, in her opening statement, it was before the Judiciary Committee, she outlined her priorities if confirmed as Attorney General.
If confirmed as the next Attorney General of the United States, my overriding objective will be to return the Department of Justice to its core mission of keeping Americans safe and vigorously prosecuting criminals. And that includes getting back to basics: gangs, drugs, terrorists, cartels, our border, and our foreign adversaries. That is what the American people expect, and that is what they deserve from the Department of Justice. If confirmed, I will do everything in my power, and it will be my great responsibility to make America safe again. Making America safe again also requires reducing recidivism. We have to fix the Bureau of Prisons, and I am looking on both sides of the aisle. The Bureau has suffered from years of mismanagement, lack of funding, and low morale. I was proud to support President Trump's First Step Act. I think more can be implemented and more can be done on that front. President Trump's leadership on criminal justice reform has demonstrated what is possible when a president is unafraid to do things that have been deemed to be too difficult. We have to reach across the aisle and get solutions for all of these problems. Like the president, I believe we are on the cusp of a new golden age where the Department of Justice can and will do better if I am confirmed. Lastly, and most importantly, if confirmed, I will fight every day to restore confidence and integrity to the Department of Justice and each of its components. The partisanship, the weaponization will be gone. America will have one tier of justice for all.
Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi, part of her opening statement before the Senate Judiciary Committee today. During the question and answer period, Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, asked her about the Justice Department's independence from the White House.
One of the concerns I've raised with you is safeguarding the Department of Justice's independence in the face of some promises on the campaign trail by then candidate Trump that he would use the department to target his political adversaries, or that he might interfere with prosecution. What would you do if your career DOJ prosecutors came to you with a case to prosecute, grounded in the facts and law, but the White House directs you to drop the case?
Senator, if I thought that would happen, I would not be sitting here today. That will not happen, will not happen. Every case will be prosecuted based on the facts and the law that is applied in good faith, period. Politics have got to be taken out of the system.
I agree with you.
This department has been weaponized for years and years and years,
but let
and
me,
it has
if
to
I
stop.
Thank you. Let me, if I might, Madam Attorney General, refer you back to Senator Durbin's opening comments about previous attorneys general, our former colleague, Jeff Sessions, Bill Barr. I don't think it's credible to say that it may never happen that the president-elect would direct an unethical or illegal act. I think both of those attorneys general found themselves crosswise with the then president by doing things he didn't welcome or approve of. Just answer the question for me, if you would. I know you may not expect it. I know you wouldn't have accepted this nomination if you thought it possible. But let's imagine that once again, President-elect Trump issues a directive or order to you or to the FBI director that is outside the boundaries of ethics or law. What will you do?
Senator, I will never speak on a hypothetical, especially one saying that the president would do something illegal. What I can tell you is my duty, if confirmed as the Attorney General, will be to the Constitution and the United States of America. And the most important oath, part of that oath that I will take, are the last four words: so help me God.
Given the importance of that oath, I hope you can understand the importance of repeated questions from some of us about the importance of having independence in the Department of Justice. It has a long tradition of independent special prosecutors, especially to handle high-profile or often political cases. If you got credible evidence of a criminal violation by a White House official, including even the president, would you bring in a special prosecutor?
Senator, that's a hypothetical. I can tell you what I do know is special prosecutors have been abused in the past on both sides. We have seen that for many, many years. They have cost the taxpayers countless dollars, countless. And I will look at each situation on a case-by-case basis and consult the appropriate career ethics officials within the department to make that decision.
Pam Bondi, questioned by Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. Washington Times writes that Pam Bondi clashed Wednesday with Senator Alex Padilla over her past claims about foul play in the 2020 presidential election and her willingness to uphold birthright citizenship if she is confirmed to the Justice Department's top position. Mr. Padilla, California Democrat, pressed the Trump administration's Attorney General nominee about whether she believed that there was election interference in the Pennsylvania general election 5 years ago. Ms. Bondi helped the Trump campaign pursue legal challenges in the Keystone State that ultimately proved fruitless. That was from the Washington Times article. Here's part of the exchange between Pam Bondi and Senator Padilla.
Do you have any evidence of election fraud or irregularities in the 2020 election?
So, first, Senator.
Yes or no? It's a yes or no question.
First, Senator.
Do you have evidence, yes or no?
First, Senator. I'm so sorry about the fires to you and Senator Schiff and what you're going through in your states. I have to say that.
I appreciate
I think
that.
all
My
of our,
clock is
I'll
ticking,
answer
and I
your
want to
question.
hear
All of our
your answer.
hearts go out to everyone in California for what you're facing right now. I'm glad you asked the question about Pennsylvania.
It's a yes or no question.
I was
Do
hoping
you have
someone
evidence, yes or
would.
no?
Senator, I was hoping you'd ask the question.
Do you have evidence, yes or no?
I traveled to Pennsylvania.
Do you have the evidence, yes or no?
I traveled, Senator, to Pennsylvania.
Okay. You're not answering my question. If you have no evidence to offer, let me ask you this. Will you now retract your previous statements that Trump won Pennsylvania in the 2020 election, yes or no?
Oh, Senator, I traveled to Pennsylvania, and let me tell you what I saw firsthand.
Yes or
no? I didn't talk about California because I was not in California. I talked about...
Yes or no? Last time I'm going to ask.
I talked about Pennsylvania because
Mr.
I
Chair,
was there.
I'm going to move on because she's clearly not answering my questions. And I want to know, colleagues, for everybody, members of the committee and everybody watching, that the attorney who stood beside Mr. Giuliani was making very similar statements. And he has since been disbarred from multiple jurisdictions for making these false claims about the 2020 election in court. And like Mr. Giuliani, as you've noted today, you've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution just as an attorney. And now you're asking us to consider you to serve as the chief law enforcement officer in our country. So it's imperative, Ms. Bondi, that you subscribe to facts and evidence and not politically convenient conspiracy theories.
Senator Alex Padilla, Democrat from California, questioning Pam Bondi, Florida Attorney General nominated for U.S. Attorney General in the next Trump administration, part of the Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing today. The 2020 presidential election came up many times during the hearing, as did the speculation that President-elect Trump might pardon those convicted in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol in 2021. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, is the committee's ranking member.
Do you believe that the January 6 rioters who've been convicted of violent assaults on police officers should be pardoned?
Senator, if confirmed as Attorney General of the United States, the pardons, of course, fall under the president. But if asked to look at those cases, I will look at each case and advise on a case-by-case basis, just as I did my entire career as a prosecutor.
You also advise the president on pardons as part of your responsibility as Attorney General. And so I'm asking you, do you believe that those who've been convicted of the January 6 riot, violent assaults on our police officers, should be pardoned? That's a simple question.
So, Senator, I have not seen any of those files, of course. If confirmed and if asked to advise the president, I will look at each and every file. But let me be very clear in speaking to you. I condemn any violence on a law enforcement officer in this country.
Pam Bondi, questioned by Senator Dick Durbin. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, former chair of the committee, spoke about Pam Bondi's qualifications at today's hearing and asked her about immigration and border security.
President Trump asked a bunch of us, who would you pick for Attorney General? How many of you got asked that on our side? Probably didn't ask Dick, but he asked me. I said Pam Bondi. That's like an easy decision. I couldn't think of anybody more qualified, that he knew, that he trusted. And it's okay to have, you were his lawyer, right?
Yes, sir. I represented him when they tried to impeach him the first time as part of White House Counsel, Office of Special Counsel.
Being Trump's lawyer prepares you for many things. So, yeah, you have a long-standing relationship with the president. He trusts you. That's a good thing. That's probably why President Kennedy picked his brother, Bobby Kennedy. I guess you can say no to your older brother. I'm sure he would. But this idea there's something bad is ridiculous. Who do you pick? You pick people you know. You pick people you trust, people that you're qualified. I'm glad he picked you. He knows you, he trusts you, and you're highly qualified. So the idea that there's something wrong with that is just absolutely ridiculous. So let's talk about the job you're about to have here. Do you support making certain drug cartels in Mexico foreign terrorist organizations?
Senator, I personally went to Mexico. I personally dealt with these cartels when I was a state prosecutor, and they are a grave and violent threat to our country. Yes, Senator.
Advising the president. Good, good. Now, when it comes to Crossfire Hurricane, are those days over if you're Attorney General?
Absolutely.
Okay. Lake and Riley, are you familiar with that case?
Sadly, I am, Senator Graham.
Do you know why the man who killed her was released from custody? He was paroled to the detention capacity at the Central Processing Center in El Paso, Texas. Now, that's not your call. You'll be DOJ. But do you agree with me that the statute regarding parole doesn't allow parole to be based on we don't have detention beds? There's nothing in that statute would authorize parole based on lack of capacity. Are you familiar with that statute?
Yes, sir, and that's frightening.
Yeah, well, it is frightening. Are you going to fix it?
I am going to do everything in my power to fix it if confirmed as Attorney General.
You're going to advise President Trump we need more beds. Tom Homan's the guy that's going to do this, but would you as Attorney General say we need more bed space so Lake and Riley never happens again?
Senator, my job, if confirmed as Attorney General, will be to keep America safe.
Do you think we need more detention space?
And that includes having enough space for violent criminals, for people that should not be in this country who have committed violent crimes. And Lake and Riley is one of many.
Yeah.
Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi, questioned by Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina. Today's Judiciary Committee hearing went about 5 hours, and the full video is available at cspan.org. The Judiciary Committee will be holding another hearing Thursday on this nomination with outside witness testifying. Former state attorney, statewide prosecutor, and sheriff from Florida on the list, along with interest group representatives like Public Citizen. Washington Post writes that President-elect Donald Trump's choice to head the Central Intelligence Agency pledged Wednesday that he would not impose political litmus tests or skew intelligence at the spy agency, rejecting concerns he might politicize an institution that Trump has frequently described as part of the deep state opposed to him. John Ratcliffe, who served as Director of National Intelligence in Trump's first term, appeared likely to win easy confirmation after his appearance before the Senate Intelligence Committee, where he found a warm reception. No senator disclosed plans to oppose his nomination. The 59-year-old former federal prosecutor repeatedly sought to reassure lawmakers he would not seek to alter the agency's code of staying out of partisan politics. That was from the Washington Post. One of the senators raising that issue at today's hearing was the vice chair, Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia.
There is concern in the community. I hear it. You may have heard it. When we hear statements by incoming administration officials, and occasionally even from the president-elect himself, attacking the intelligence community and threatening to replace long-term career civil servants if they are somehow deemed as not sufficiently loyal. You've addressed this, but I want to address it again right now. What assurances can you provide to this committee and to the CIA workforce that you will resist efforts to fire or force out career CIA employees because of their perceived political views or somehow their views of loyalty to the president?
Well, I think the best example of that, Mr. Vice Chairman, is if you look at my record and my record as DNI, that never took place. That is never something anyone has alleged, and it's something that I would never do. So I would approach this position very much the same way and provide the same assurance.
Again, I think there has been, a lot has happened in the last 4 years since your prior service. There have been these comments. I would again, if you are asked to remove personnel, to get rid of individuals based upon this kind of political litmus test, I'd ask that you keep the committee informed of those requests.
I certainly will.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, the Intelligence Committee Vice Chair, questioning the witness, John Ratcliffe, CIA Director nominee. The open portion of the hearing ran about 2 hours. There was a closed classified portion. Again, from the Washington Post article, the CIA is the most powerful U.S. spy agency responsible for recruiting and running foreign agents, conducting covert actions, and providing intelligence analysis to the president and other top U.S. officials. Ratcliffe gave only broad indications of how he would seek to change the agency. A priority, he said, would be a more muscular approach to recruiting human sources and stealing adversaries' secrets, a core mission which he suggested has lagged in recent years. We all know that the human intelligence collection isn't where it needs to be, he told the committee. Washington Today continues in a moment.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
I, Harry S. Truman.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will to the best of my ability.
And will to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Watch C-SPAN's all-day inauguration coverage on Monday, January 20th, including the historic swearing in as Donald Trump takes office as the 47th President of the United States. C-SPAN, Democracy Unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From CNN, President Joe Biden, in a farewell letter to the American people, reflects on his last 4 years and his presidency ahead of his primetime Oval Office address. The letter begins with Biden discussing when America stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities, grappling with a pandemic, economic crisis, and political unrest when he first took office. He then highlighted his key accomplishments during his last 4 years and says that the nation emerged stronger, pointing to the economy, manufacturing, and dropping crime rates as his proof. That was from CNN. The letter also says it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. And he said, I ran for president because I believed that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake, and that's still the case. Vice President Kamala Harris, also a few days from the end of her term, today stopped by the National Action Network's annual Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast in Washington. January 20th is both Inauguration Day and the King holiday. Vice President Harris, who is from California, spoke about the Southern California wildfires that have killed at least 25 people and destroyed thousands of homes and businesses.
And so, Nan, as we move forward with this new year, one of the requests that I make of the leaders here is let's use the voice of Nan in a way that lifts up what these moments of tragedy and these extreme weather events are doing to the communities that you have historically worked to uplift. Because there are a couple things going on that I see as patterns. One is this, and it's about what the insurance companies are not doing to extend coverage. They are canceling coverage, making it more difficult for young homeowners who are just the first time buying their home, not even insuring them. And what that means to those families and whole communities with these predictable extreme weather events, which are increasing. Climate change is real. We have long known that some of the communities that will be most devastated by them are communities of color, hardworking communities, black folks. We know when we talk about the Gulf states, right? So that's one issue. The other issue that these extreme weather events are highlighting, but is a big issue for all of us to deal with, is the rampant amount of mis and disinformation that is transiting throughout communities. And the work that we then must do to not only recognize that it's happening, but figure out how we're going to jump into that stream of mis and disinformation in a way that we at the very least can debate it based on the facts that we know to be true in terms of what's happening on the ground, but also to rebut the sources of that mis and disinformation, because it often leads the people who Nan has historically worked for in a place of despair and in a place of helplessness and hopelessness. Again, using as the example extreme weather events, when people are being told, oh, there will be no FEMA response, oh, you are not entitled to this or that, or leading them astray with information that is misinformation about what they will be entitled to, which exceeds what it might be, and then they feel disappointed and they turn the whole system off. So I'm here to talk about these couple of things because they've just been on my mind in the last week.
Vice President Kamala Harris today at the Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast in Washington, D.C., hosted by the National Action Network. CNN writes there'll be no pre-inaugural tour of the vice president's residence for the incoming Vance family. Two sources familiar with J.D. Vance's plans told CNN, who noted he has not received an invitation to the residence from its current occupant, Vice President Kamala Harris. The nicety has been a recent norm, though Harris never went to the Naval Observatory prior to assuming the role in the aftermath of Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. New York Times writes that Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, a leading Democrat from a critical battleground state, on Wednesday subtly warned against President-elect Donald J. Trump's tariffs threats targeting Canada, even as she stressed her broader willingness to work with him on the cusp of his second inauguration. Her speech at the Detroit Auto Show offered among the clearest examples yet of how Democrats from states that Mr. Trump carried are seeking to balance fresh overtures to the incoming president and their staunch opposition to some of his policy proposals. That was from the New York Times. Here's Governor Whitmer.
Heading into 2025, I'm really looking forward to working with Speaker Hall, Majority Leader Brinks, Leader Nesbitt, Leader Puri, and President-elect Trump. Michiganders elected both me and Donald Trump twice, just 2 years apart. Every one of us swore an oath to the people we serve. And the people expect us to find common ground, especially when it comes to lowering costs, creating good-paying manufacturing jobs, boosting research and innovation, and cutting red tape. Now, I don't want to pretend we're always going to agree, but I will always seek collaboration first. I won't go looking for fights. I won't back down from them either, because I'm not here to play games. I've got a job to do. And that brings me to why I'm speaking with all of you here at the Auto Show. Usually I wait until my State of the State address to lay out an economic vision, but this could not wait. This is a serious moment. Right now, the future of the entire auto industry is at stake. The very core of Michigan's economy is on the line.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat from Michigan, today at the Detroit Auto Show. Detroit Regional Chambers says that the auto industry accounts for 20% of Michigan's workforce and contributes over $300 billion to the state's economy each year. An NPR article from November reads that President-elect Donald Trump is promising to slash through what he says is significant waste in the American government. One way he plans to do this is through impoundment. That's when a president effectively holds back money that Congress has approved for a specific purpose. That plan is raising alarm bells across Washington because it would challenge the traditional separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches of government. That was from the NPR article. President-elect Trump's nominee for OMB director, Russell Vought, was asked about this when he testified today before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Questions coming from the ranking Democrat, Gary Peters of Michigan.
Mr. Voda, under your leadership in 2019, OMB illegally withheld $214 million that Congress appropriated to the Department of Defense to provide security assistance to Ukraine. The Government Accountability Office concluded that OMB's actions were a violation of the Impoundment Control Act and that your actions then forced Congress to reappropriate the funds. Just 4 years ago, you told this very committee that under your leadership, OMB would abide by the Impoundment Control Act. However, your past actions and public statements suggest that you may not follow this law in the future. So my question for you, sir, is if you are confirmed as OMB director again, do you commit to follow the law and allow OMB to withhold funding from and not allow OMB to withhold funding from programs that Congress has appropriated?
Senator, thanks for the question. I will always commit to upholding the law. I disagree with the characterization of the General Accounting Office. My time at OMB, we followed the law consistently, and we will continue to do so.
So that you can withhold funds that are appropriated by Congress? You think that's within the law?
Again, Senator, we did not hold inappropriately funds. We were engaged in a policy process with regard to how funding would flow to Ukraine. We released the funding by the end of the fiscal year.
Do you believe the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is the law of the land that you must follow?
It is the law of the land. As you know, the president has run on that issue. He believes it's unconstitutional. For 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend less than an appropriation if they could do it for less. And we have seen the extent to which this law has contributed to waste, fraud, and abuse. But as it pertains to the parameters of how we would use that, that's something that his team will have to consider when they are confirmed in these roles.
Director of OMB, Office of Management and Budget, the White House Budget Director nominee Russell Vought, questioned by Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan, ranking member on the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. You can find this confirmation hearing in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow up 703, NASDAQ up 466, S&P up 107. CNBC writes that prices that consumers pay for a variety of goods and services rose again in December, but closed out 2024 with some mildly better news on inflation, particularly on housing. Consumer Price Index increased a seasonably adjusted 0.4% on the month, putting the 12-month inflation rate at 2.9%, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Wednesday. Economists surveyed by Dow Jones had been looking for respective readings of 0.3% and 2.9%. That was from CNBC. Food and Drug Administration, writes CBS News, is moving to cut out addictive nicotine from cigarettes, according to a long-awaited proposed regulation released Wednesday. The rule aims to force the nearly 12% of Americans still using combustible tobacco products to switch to less dangerous alternatives like vaping electronic cigarettes or using nicotine lozenges, while ending rates of youth starting to smoke traditional cigarettes. That was from CBS News. U.S. Supreme Court justices, begins a Reuters article, expressed worries on Wednesday over the availability of online pornography to minors as they weighed the legality of a Texas law that requires pornographic websites to verify the age of users, but also voiced concern over burdens imposed on adults to view constitutionally protected material. Here's some of the oral argument in the case. Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton. Derek Schaefer, lawyer for the coalition, which represents the adult entertainment industry, is questioned by Chief Justice John Roberts. He refers to Sable. That's the court's 1988 decision in Sable Communications of California v. FCC, where the court struck down a federal law that prohibited dial-a-porn telephone messaging services.
Sable, of course, was 35 years ago. In that period, the technological access to pornography obviously has exploded, right? I mean, it's very difficult for 15-year-olds, whatever, to get access to the type of things that is available with a push of a button today. And the nature of the pornography, I think, has also changed in those 35 years. And so are those the sort of developments that suggest revisiting the standard of scrutiny is something that we should at least consider, as opposed to keeping a structure that was accepted and established in an entirely different era?
I'd respectfully urge you not to, Mr. Chief Justice, and for the same reasons that Your Honors did in the Holder case, in the Yulee case, and opinions that you wrote, Mr. Chief Justice. The extent of the interest does not change the standard of scrutiny. It simply goes to whether the applicable scrutiny is satisfied. And we are here conceding explicitly that there is a compelling interest that is at work in this area. We encourage state efforts to regulate in a way that is properly tailored, is respectful of adults' rights, and is really going to help protect kids. And so that, Your Honors, is exactly where strict scrutiny does its work. And I think for the reasons that we were discussing with Justice Sotomayor, it is as well warranted here as in the entire string of cases where Your Honors have continuously applied strict scrutiny, even as there were new problems, new technologies that government was trying to tackle.
Attorney Derek Schaefer and Chief Justice John Roberts at today's oral argument in the Supreme Court case Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton challenging a Texas law requiring age verification for access to pornographic websites. Returning to the Reuters article, the 2023 measure is one of 19 similar ones, the laws, enacted around the United States, primarily in Republican-governed states, as policymakers worry about how the proliferation of hardcore pornographic material online affects the well-being of minors. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.